Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing today, Ken?
I am well, thank you for asking, Rory, and I'm delighted to be here for the Counselling Tutor Podcast. You've joined us for episode 202, episode 202. I like the sound of that, Rory. We've got 3 topics in 202, starting off with Counselling Foundations, where we visit the important foundations that we build our counselling practices on, and we're going to be looking today at pacing yourself within your sessions. We then move on to the focus on self, where we recognise that as practitioners, we are the heart of our practice. And today, we're going to be looking at the importance of journaling. Interesting. And loads of questions come up about that. And then in Practice Matters, which is our section where we will look at something you may come across in your counselling practice, we have Chloe Foster working with inclusivity with the LGBTQ community. So lots to look forward today, but starting out with those Counselling Foundations, pacing yourself in counselling sessions, Rory.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's one of the most difficult disciplines to learn when you start as a novice therapist, because, as I've said many times in the podcast, you know, the opening of counselling is rather like the opening of a theatre. The curtains draw back, the stage is set, the protagonists are on the stage, and then it opens. And how it opens and how we pace the session impacts, I think, on the relationship, how the client feels, how the client can relate to us, and what the client can share. And also it impacts on ourselves. You know, as a tutor, I've seen many novice therapists start off like a galloping horse, or a greyhound, straight out and straight in. So, what we come for today, and this can be overwhelming. It's very important that we learn to go not just at the client's pace, but just behind the client. We should always just be slightly behind the client when they're telling us something, or we're picking up a piece of non-verbal communication. We should just be behind the client, so we're able to kind of take some time, think about what it means. I'm always a great believer in just checking what does this mean? What is happening here? And then considering your interaction or your intervention. And I think it just does take a bit of getting used to. It's a bit like driving a car, really, or learning a new skill. You've just got to really experience it before you could do it, Ken.
Yeah, and we're speaking about therapeutic pacing, so that's within the session. And I think looking at pacing starts with looking at who you are outside of the session. What is your nature? And I'm going to give you an example. When I go for a walk with my wife Colette and my daughter Kristen, they are forever saying, "You walk too fast. You're a very fast walker." I'm a fast walker. I'm a fast talker. I tend to think quickly. I tend to act quickly. It is within my nature. It's how I'm made up. My metabolism is faster. It's just who I am as a person. So recognizing that is me, I then need to look at, how do I present? How do I show up? What part of me do I bring when I show up professionally with a client? Because if I bring that walk too fast, talk too fast, do too quick side of me into the therapy session, then it's me and it's my session, and I'm leading the way and I'm setting the pace and I'm setting the rate at which we're going to move forward. And that is not in service of the client. In podcast episode 201, last week's podcast, we spoke about unconditional positive regard and looking at a client without judgment. And part of unconditional positive regard is recognizing that this is the client's space that we professionally hold. It's not ours. It's not for us to be there to counsel the client. It is more for the client to come for the counselling. So it's just a slight different way of looking at it, but a really important difference when we look at it that way. If we truly do have unconditional positive regard for this client, then it is theirs to lead the session at their pace. And I like what you've said, Rory. It's not about us matching the pace of the client. It's about us being slightly behind the pace of the client. And why? So that the client is leading the session. The client leads the session. Of course, we start off, we need to maybe contract, set the boundaries where we are leading. But as soon as we hand over to that client, it is theirs to lead from that moment on. And one of the greatest counselling skills for working with that is the skill of silence. We do less. We listen intently, openly to this full client, who they are, how they're sitting, how they're presenting, if it's online, what are we seeing, if it's on the phone, what's the tone of the voice. We're listening intently to the whole of this client, not saying anything, not feeling we have to jump in and keep it running and keep it moving. And that client will naturally start setting the pace.
I couldn't put it better myself, Ken. And I think the idea of us just using the skill of silence as a default skill when we start off with is so important. It's such an underrated skill, because it allows the client to work at their own pace, to move at their own pace, to exercise self-care and protection, because protection is a great big thing in the therapy room. And it's not something that we can always offer completely as therapists. You know, the client themselves has to be involved in their own emotional protection. So the use of silence is a really, really useful tool. And also be thoughtful on questioning. I've observed some skill sessions. Certainly my early skill sessions as a student I would have been a better interrogator than a therapist. I was, well, what about this? And what about that? And,
have you tried this?
Have you tried this? Have you tried that? And you said this before, but now you're saying that. And nowadays, I hardly ever use questions in my practice, only to clarify. So if someone's talking about a complex relationship they're having with a number of people, and they say, well, she said that and he said this, I might say, just so I understand, who is he and who is she? And I think that, I'm sure that benefits and sets the pace, because again, I'm just putting slight interactions in, and then the client is speaking. You know the magic of this, Ken. The absolute magic is you can see that when you're working at the correct pace, the client is putting the pieces together themselves.
Yeah.
That you can see the pennies dropping, and then they might say, so if I did that, that wouldn't happen. And I might use then the skill of reflection and say, so you're saying that you've come up with a different way of approaching it. And if you did that, then what's troubling you may not be the same. And they go, yes. But it is, therapeutic pacing is a skill. And you're right, we live in a society that wants answers, targets, deadlines. And in therapy, we work at someone else's pace. And that can be, I think that can be sometimes frustrating, because some clients move very slowly. And I always used to say to my students, you know, what you consider a very small change might be enormous for the person who sat in front of you. So don't judge any changes or movement by your own frame of reference. It's always their frame of reference.
That's so important. That, again, goes back to that unconditional positive regard, being in the client's frame of reference. And the word that comes up for me is the word trust. Trusting that the client will find the way. Now, it depends on your modality. If you're working in CBT, you're going to be setting homework, you're going to be working with tried and tested and evidence-based interventions. But if you're working from a person-centered perspective, It's about trusting that the client will find the way. We're not there as the expert to go, so what is it that's okay, that's going on? Oh, well, what you want to be doing there is this and this and this. Let me just get the big red book of counseling answers off my shelf, look up what it is you're presenting with, and tell you exactly what you need to do here. Clients are told all the time by those around them what they should do. Oh, you need to leave him. Oh, you need to stop doing that. Oh, you need to start doing this. They're bombarded with everybody else's opinions on what they should be doing. So often we can find ourselves in a position where we kind of know what we should, and I'm putting that in inverted commas, be doing. However, we just can't bring ourselves to do it, or we keep on breaking our own promises to ourselves. This is what a client is going through by allowing the patients, bringing the patients, not allowing, bringing the patients into the relationship. The client will find their own way. And when they find their own way, then there is ownership to them. If it's given from an external perspective, we give them the answer, a friend gives them the answer, a partner tells them what you should be doing is. There's no ownership in that. It's when the client is in that place where they go, hold on, I've just had a light bulb moment. That is their own processing kicking in. It never comes from an external place, that those light bulbs. It comes from internal, where something that may have been known for years suddenly makes sense in a different way. There is ownership in that. And that can only come about if the client is given the space to explore, the space to find their own way. And the difficult part is, from the therapist's point of view, extending that trusting the client may find their own way. And one of the things you brought in, Rory, is about that patience, being patient with the client. And it goes back to, what is your default? When I listen to an audiobook, I put it on 1.5 times speed, because the person's not speaking fast enough. I can get through this book quicker and I can get onto the next book. That's me. I'm always moving quickly. But within that professional relationship, the patience, so that the client takes their time and is not working at our pace, so important.
Absolutely, Ken. And I was struck many years ago by a quote from John Schleen, who there's a book. He didn't actually write it. It's a collection of his papers by Pete Saunders, I think, and it's called To Lead an Honourable Life. It's available from PCCS Books. And Schleen was probably the greatest exponent of person-centered therapy. He was a student of Carl Rogers. And he talked about going to a poppy field to watch the poppies open. He'd do it every year to remind himself of the benefit and the power of self-direction. And he'd say he could open the poppies, their leaves were closed, he could see the beauty inside. However, he damaged the leaves. What better way of looking at the beauty and seeing the whole undamaged poppy than watching it open? And he'd go up to the poppy field and he'd watch them slowly open in the sun. And that's a great metaphor for the work we do to not leave our fingerprints on clients in terms of telling them what to do, but to help them unfold themselves and show their inner beauty. And if you want to pick that quote up and the handout that goes with it, the therapeutic pacing, the 4 rules of therapeutic pacing, if you go to counsellingtutor.com, go to podcast episode 202, that handout is there for you. And I think if you are practicing counselling, it's a must-have download. Download it, share it with your classroom buddies. Give it to your teacher. They probably have a copy, but give it to your teacher. It's something I used to use in teaching, and I know that Ken's used it as well when we talk together. And it is really, really useful to get a sense of, as I said earlier at the top of the episode, to walk slightly behind the client, exercise patience, and watch the inner beauty unfurl. It's for those of us who practice, it's a wonderful thing.
It is. It's a definite must-have handout. The therapeutic pacing, I think, is something you work on through the arc of your practice. It's not that you get to the point and go, right, well, I've got that sorted now. Every client is going to be different, idiosyncratic in how they appear and how they present. And it's about looking who they are and matching the pace that they set. That patience, really, really important for me personally. So I'm speaking from my perspective, that patience was the key, being patient. You know, you speaking about John Schilling, looking at those poppies, wanting them to open, I can almost see myself sat there going, come on now, hurry up. Yeah, come on, open up. And if you try, it does nothing. And of course, if you try and open it yourself, you damage it. You can get to the inside, but you're damaging it. You're going to leave your damage on that flower. That patience. And beware of the honey trap. And what I mean by the honey trap is a client can come in session number 1, and they can, in their first kind of presentation, they can mention something about what they are coming for, and they may not retouch on that topic. So I'm going to give an example. They may come and say, I'm here because I'm really struggling. I'm in an abusive relationship and my life is blah, blah, blah. And they can go on with the thing. They may never go back to that abusive relationship, which for us as a therapist, we may go, ha, there's the work. We need to look at that. Well, it's up to the client to rebuild that. Not for us in session 3 to go, when you first came in, you mentioned that. Because we're setting the pace. We're taking them where we want to go. Trust that the client will bring what they need to bring at the time they need to bring it, and they will find their own way, and be patient within that trust. And most importantly, get the handout. CounsellingTutor.com, podcast tab, episode 202. Get Rory's super duper download handout. There you have it.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And one final thought on therapeutic pacing is just to go back to the analogy of the poppy opening. There is a struggle. Change in anybody is a struggle, and we can empathise with that struggle. We can be there while people struggle. We cannot do the struggle for them, and I think that's part of the discipline of being a therapy and therapeutic pacing, that we cannot take the client's struggle and take it on as our own. We're there to help them make sense of their lives and to make those changes. And some of them will be quite difficult changes.
Yeah.
They may be about, moving on from a partner, changing a job. They may be about sexuality and declaring who they really are and wanting people to know who they really are. And that can be a struggle, and it's a struggle that only the client can undertake. And therapeutic pacing is important so that they can be who they want to be, that process of becoming at their own pace.
I like that the topic that we started with, Counselling Foundations, pacing yourself in sessions, really neatly ties into our next topic. So this is Focus on Self, where we recognize you are the practitioner. You sit at the heart of your practice. And we're looking today at the importance of journaling. And that last kind of exit that you did of that last topic, speaking about how change takes time, it's the same with us. We're experiencing momentum and change all the time. Through the arc of our training, post-training, within our everyday life, things are changing. That's the one thing that we can bank on, is that change is going to occur around us. And with change can come disruption. And I'm speaking maybe emphasizing this point because at the moment our daughter is about to leave home and go to university, and there's a massive change that we're going to need to kind of get our heads around. And it can leave me feeling unsettled. Where do you go with that as the practitioner? Because we're not necessarily in therapy all the time. Maybe there will be times where we may dip in, but how do we keep ourselves well? And one of the ways that we can keep observation of who we are and how we are is via journaling, Rory.
Yes, absolutely. And if we think of looking through the arc of time, Samuel Pepys' journal, the captain's log from Star Trek, they're all little snippets into other people's lives. Samuel Pepys was a real life person, Star Trek captains tend to be a figment of writers' imaginations. But they do link to a very important point, and that is the journals are, or the logs, if you like, they are snippets of time that we capture, and they're very important essences of ourselves. Over the years, I've become more interested in essence, who we are, the kind of whole being. And a journal is so useful for that, because we can revisit them, we can look at them and consider who we are on the journey through life. We only get one go at this, corporeally. There are those who believe that we have another chance in another place, for those who've got a religious position, and that's fine. But generally speaking, on Earth, we only get one go at it. And I think a journal is useful to look back at our lives. And I know every Christmas when I go into the loft to get my Christmas tree out, I have some of my old personal development papers and some of my old journals. And I sit on the chair. We've got a chair in the loft, and I sit in the loft and I have a look. And it's interesting to see the person I am now compared with who I was then. And I have to say, I had rather a preoccupation with what other people thought of me as a younger man, a startling preoccupation that stands out on the pages of my journal and my personal development documents, assignments. And I have to say that, nearly 20 years on since I graduated, that's not something that I recognise in myself now. And I think that's a distance travelled. Yeah. So important to understand where we are now. Markers in the sand, Ken.
Oh yeah, I love that. And journaling comes up all the time. It's a very common question within our Facebook group. Come and join the Facebook group. Just go onto Facebook, put in the words Counselling Tutor, and come and join tens of thousands of like-minded people on the same journey related to counselling, related to therapy, related to self-development, supervisors, tutors, students of counselling, qualified therapists gathering together and having these discussions. One of the questions that comes up so often is, what are you supposed to put in a journal? How do I journal? Well, not necessarily in that tone of voice. I'm putting that on. What are you supposed to journal? How do you write a journal? And I think that I like to start with this. If you think about the thoughts, emotions, and feelings that go on within you within a day, where do you feel them? Where do they happen? Does it happen in your head? If it does touch your head, this is where it all happens for me. Or sometimes people may say it happens in my chest. Some people may say I get feelings within my stomach. But one of the things that we can recognize is that all of these processes happen internally. They're inside of us. And journaling, whatever method you use for journaling, and it doesn't have to be writing down. I personally don't write well. I'm dyslexic, and when I start writing, it's not a good connection for me. I prefer making a video or putting something down, an audio file down. So whatever method you use, it's a way of getting what is happening inside outside, and it changes the process. So as an example, I may have something going around in my head, just around and around and around, and it's kind of it's just like, it's almost like going down all these avenues, checking and then coming back, and it just goes in circles, and it's really uncomfortable, and it can lead me to anxiety. If I get that out by journaling, if I sit down in front of my computer with my microphone and have a good chat about it and listen back to it, it externalizes it for me. When I listen back to it, I hear it differently to how I hear it within my own head space. And that is what journaling is about. What you put down is less important than just getting it out.
Absolutely, Ken. And I think that it has two functions. The first function is to get it out, to put it into paper or a medium where it can be captured. It might be a video, it might be audio. I'm with you. My writing and my reading's okay. My writing isn't great, so maybe an audio file or a video file. And once it's out, you can then revisit it and see where you were at that point in time, and be able to say, was that an accurate reflection of what was really going on? Or was that just driven by anxiety or something external? So that can be useful. And also journals have another function. They can be used as learning aids, Ken. So a lot of courses now ask you to do a learning journal. And that is basically, say, for instance, you're learning about child ego state for those people who are maybe looking at transactional analysis. You may be asked in the question to explain, when the last time you were in a child ego state. What better way of doing that than actually putting it in a journal and say, today I went out and I went to see a film, and that film reminded me of being a child, and I left the cinema skipping and jumping around like I was 6, not 56. And it's first of all, it evidences criteria, but also I think it can really link the theory to who we are. And I think as we don't come with an instruction book, well, I don't know about you, Ken, I didn't come with an emotional instruction book when I was born. Or if I had, no one gave it me. I think that counselling theories do form a kind of user manual to our life. So journaling really does play into that.
Yeah. There's a magic in putting something down in a more permanent format, whether that be video, audio, written. And there is evidence, there's research evidence that kind of links into this. So if you think about goal setting, just as an example, that what I want to accomplish within the next 6 months to a year, the evidence shows that if that is written down, you're more likely to attain those goals. Just by putting it out, just by writing it down, there's almost a magic to that. I don't know how that works, but it does because the evidence points to it. And by taking stuff out of our head, taking our emotions, naming what that emotion is, which is a thing in itself, I've got this knot in my stomach. Well, what is that? I'm not just going to write down or say I've got a knot in my stomach. What is it? Is it anxiety? Is it fear? And naming that fear, it kind of calls upon us to spend a little bit of time examining what we did that day, what went on for us, what the emotions were that were turning within us. And by putting it down, making it permanent in some way, it can take some of the sting out of it. If it's negative emotions or frustrating emotions, it can take the sting out of it. But mainly, it's just about personal development. By writing these things down, by examining them, it leads to a more enlightened way of being. It just does. It gains its own momentum as you go through, and journaling can become a really enjoyable activity. If you're looking at journaling and it's a chore, I need to journal, then maybe you're not journaling in a way that best suits who you are. And I think it's about looking who you are. What do you... When I was written journaling, it was really painful for me. I didn't enjoy it at all. And I did it throughout my studies because I was called on by my training to do that. And I didn't think of going over to making audio files until I met you, Rory, and you said that you make loads of audio files for your journaling. I thought, that's a good idea. And it changed things for me. So have a look. Do you journal? Is it a chore? If it is a chore, maybe challenge yourself and go and re-look at that. Is there a different way you can do it? Could you journal with paints and paper? Could you journal by making something? Could you journal by moving shapes around that mean something to you? Find a way of getting what is internal, external, and have a look. Does that lead to a more enlightened self, to well-being?
I like the idea of creative journaling. And one idea that's just come into my head is you could plant something and watch it grow.
Yeah. And think the thoughts as you're watching it grow.
And think the thoughts of watching it grow. And, as I've always said, if you want to know where you're going, you need to know how far you've come. You need to look over your shoulder and see how far you've come. I think it's really easy if you're climbing the mountain to think, I can't get to the top of this. And then you say, look over your shoulder and you've climbed 2/3 of it. You've done the hard work. And the way to do that in terms of our kind of emotional landscape is to journal. You can look back and think, oh gosh, I remember that struggle, and it seems not so much of a struggle anymore. And that's what I did to get over it. So I can't recommend journaling enough. And find your own unique way of doing it. When we think of journaling, we think of quill pen and parchment paper. It could be audio, it could be a video. I mean, even Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek used a video, didn't he? He'd speak into his computer and do his captain's log. You could do that. There's hundreds of ways you can just put a marker down and look at it to generate that internal dialogue of where you are now, how far you've come, how you're feeling, and the obstacles that you've overcome.
There's a lot of interesting stuff about journaling. It interests me a lot, and it's something that within our family we play with quite a lot, and the different ways of journaling. If you go on to something like Amazon and put in journals, there are so many different kinds of journals. There are journals with specific layouts. There are even therapist journals, specifically for therapists, that you can buy on Amazon. And there are journals that call on you to journal in the morning, when you just wake up before you start your day. And part of that journaling might be about setting intentions for the day. What do I want out of my day today? And not, I want to do this work and that work. I'm talking about kind of more self-led outcomes, like I want to be kind to somebody today. I want to say something nice to someone today. I want to surprise someone today. One of the things I do is we've got a Marks and Spencer's car park. Marks and Spencer's is a food chain store in the UK. I believe they do clothes as well, but ours is an M&S food, and they got a little parking lot, and you get 30 minutes of free parking, Rory. You can go, but you got to go and get a ticket. You can't just go drive in. You got to go and get a ticket that gives you 30 minutes free parking and put it on your dashboard. And when I go to get a ticket, if I see somebody else walking up behind me, I know they've got to stand there and they've got to push that button, and it takes about 20 seconds to print the ticket. So I'll push it twice, and I'll just turn around and give them a ticket, and go, there you go, and I just walk off. And it's amazing what that does, the beam on their face, that unexpected kindness for no reason, for nothing in it for me, just to give that out. That I might start a day and journal that. Might look at an end of day journal where you look with a frame of gratitude. What was I grateful for today? And starting in that point, it's kind of like what we do in our meetings in Counselling Tutor. Whenever we have a meeting, the very first thing we do is we have what's called a positive check-in, where we bring something good that has happened in our day that we can share with others, not necessarily work-based. It can be anything. And checking out each day with a positive checkout and going, what am I grateful for today? Because I guess our human selves tend to very easily get trapped and weighed down by what bad things happened to me today. And just by stopping and saying, gratitude list, name the 2 things that I'm happy about today, that I'm grateful for today. What difference did I make today? These are just ideas. There's loads of journaling ideas out there. If you Google it, lots on journaling. Really interesting topic, Rory.
It's a fascinating topic, and just an observation that I would have: people who journal, I know quite a few people, and people who journal tend to be more introspective, more I'm almost tempted to say compassionate. Maybe I don't know everybody, of course, but I think it's that effort of introspection, that taking time to pause and think about the day, think about what's going on, how they're interacting with the world, is something that perhaps we just don't do, and I think it's lost. I think it's lost. Even just writing your dreams down, is really, really useful, and I couldn't recommend it more. And as I said, you don't have to write it. You can record it. You can grow something. There's lots of ways, and I like what Ken said about there's loads of worksheets you can get off the internet, journaling worksheets. You just find your own way of doing it, but I guarantee you'll be more fulfilled, I think.
As we leave this topic, we say so often on the podcast, I'm going to say it again, Rory and I are not experts. We're not here telling people what you should do and how you should do it. We're two colleagues, and we just discuss things that we find interesting and things that come up on our Facebook group, and we love it. We just have a great natter together. And I'd like to do a call out. If there's anybody listening to this that has any research that shows any kind of outcome from journaling, I'd really be interesting, because you were very, very, very selective of your words there, Rory. You said, I think, and we put that in because we're not claiming to be the expert. Exactly. If there is research, I'd really like to see that, because I think I'm with you there, Rory. I think it makes a difference in enlightenment of who that person is. I'd love to see research work on, is there a positive outcome from journaling?
Yeah, or maybe if you're thinking of looking for a dissertation subject or some research, that is a great starter, isn't it? That's a great one to have a look at.
Well, there you have it. That is our focus on self. We now move on to practice matters. In practice matters, we look at something that may come up in our practice, in our day-to-day practice. Rory, you met up with Chloe Foster, speaking about inclusivity and working with LGBTQ community. And I know that can be an area that maybe not everybody has a full understanding of, and you can find yourself maybe trying to tiptoe around and not say the wrong thing or stand in the wrong place, or I think this is an important topic.
It's an incredibly important topic, and as Chloe outlines, we talk about some of the difficulties we think we might get into, and she helps us realize that it's not as difficult as we may like to think sometimes, being inclusive, being progressive, but we do have to be thoughtful. I caught up with Chloe, and this is what she had to say.
Practice matters.
And we welcome Chloe Foster, who's done a fabulous lecture for the Counsellor Study Resource and the Counsellor CPD Library on working inclusively with the LGBT community. So, Chloe, a very warm welcome.
Hi, Rory. Thank you for having me. Great to chat to you here.
So, what will people learn when they watch your lecture?
Well, my plan was, when I put this together, was to give people some practical steps for counsellors to working with their clients. And it's kind of broken into three parts. I'm first of all talking a little bit about my own experiences as a client and as a counsellor. And then we talk we talk about what LGBTQ means, really. The second part, we're talking about LGBTQ inclusion, the importance of it, why it's important in a counsellor and why it's important to clients. And the third part, the biggest part of it really, is the practical steps. My plan was to kind of give people things to take away, so you can sort of sit and watch it and take notes, keep, stop and rewind and all of that, and things to take away, really, because it's all about using it, really, rather than just learning theory.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about applying it, isn't it? And I guess a good place to start would be regarding LGBTQ plus. And I'm not even sure if I have that right, if I'm honest, Chloe, because I've seen it written in so many different ways. So help us out. What is the actual correct way, and why is it important that we understand what it means?
Well, I think with the LGBTQ plus acronym, that is actually something that we cover in the lecture. There is lots of differing opinions, and as many listeners would know, that it's often been saying LGBT, and now we've kind of added the Q, we've got the plus, and it's kind of become a bit of an alphabet soup, which is something that I've spoken about in the lecture. And we're kind of talking about kind of different ways about how we might use that language, and if that is actually that important to get caught up on, and what is it really that our clients need, but just also being careful about kind of how we present that. And you asked about why LGBTQ inclusion is important.
Yes, absolutely. It might sound an obvious question. Sometimes
absolutely.
we do ask obvious questions.
So really this comes from, and I speak a little bit about this in the lecture, my personal experience. as being a member of the LGBTQ community myself, I am a gay woman, and I talk a little bit about my first experience going to counselling and how scared I was to mention that I had a girlfriend. And it was just like, oh, and I even just noticed myself there, like hesitation, like, and it's, even though I know that the person, or I hope that the professional I'm speaking to is going to be okay with it. It's that kind of, can I say it out loud? And I am aware of that in my friends and peers that are LGBTQ, and also the clients that I work, because I specialize in working with LGBTQ clients and working with gender and sexual diversity in my counselling practice. And I'm just aware so much about how I've lost count of how many clients have come to me and have said, oh yeah, I've had counselling in the past, but my gender or my sexuality just didn't come up. I didn't feel able to say it. And there's something about the fear of taking that risk, even though they think that they'll hope that they'll probably be okay. It's that fear of, what if there's just that little flicker of the eye, that kind of assumption, that kind of, they won't quite get me.
Yes.
And what I want to do with this lecture and the work that I do with counsellors is to try and build that confidence in counsellors so that they are less likely to inadvertently make assumptions, which we all do. I mean, no, we do that because we're counsellors. But if we can try and take that time to reflect on the work that we do and think about where we're coming from, and you know, take that time to reflect and go through some of these steps really that I've kind of put together.
Yeah, seeing all of the clients, isn't it? It's, you know, if you're holding back a part of yourself, then part of yourself's not available in the room, and also the therapist can't see that. And I guess some people may be asking the question, why in these enlightened times, and maybe this is an obvious question, why in these enlightened times would someone be fearful about speaking about their sexuality?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great question. And I think that so I run lots of training workshops for counsellors, and I have sort of similar questions like that. People kind of wondering, well, why would the client be scared? What, you know, we're in the UK and it's relatively safe. There's like laws, protection, things like this. However, there's the history and there's the shadow, and there is still so many things, so many rights, and so many things that are that need to change, and the things that need to happen. And also, I think what I talk a bit more detail about in the lecture is the terms heteronormative society and cisnormative society. And just to very simply clarify that in this podcast, it's basically the idea that as a society, as a whole, we tend to assume that someone is straight or not trans, unless we're told any different. And that is the problem, really. And that is why it can be difficult for clients, because they basically, gay, bi, trans clients, they have to come out. Straight people don't, cisgender people don't have to come out. And it's that kind of extra level of, they have to say it, and that risk and that fear of like, what is it going to be like to talk to my counsellor? Are they going to get it? Have they worked with a trans client before? Am I the first one? Am I going to have to educate at my counsellor? All these sorts of questions tend to run through people's minds, and that's the sorts of things that clients have told me, and that in experiences they've had in the past, or not just in counselling, but with other professionals, which can sort of add to those fears.
Yeah, and I kind of knew the answer to that question before I asked it, before anybody sends any letters in. But I think it is an interesting point. It's from a position of presumption, because we are, it is changing, but we are a heteronormative society, and generally speaking, and I could understand that it can be a big kind of step for a a client to kind of come out. And I think that's an interesting term, coming out. It's almost like coming out again, isn't it? To your therapist. Yeah. So, well, as we think about therapists, what do therapists have to consider generally when wanting to be more inclusive with LGBTQ plus clients, or to be more thoughtful of who they meet? Because there's no it may be they meet someone they don't know. So how could we be more thoughtful?
Well, I think there's definitely a number of things that I go through in the lecture, but I think like number one, and the first thing I think could be really helpful to do is personal reflection. I think that it all starts with us, like I was saying earlier, and there's a reason why as counsellors we have to do our own personal therapy through our training. And when we work with clients and a client group who perhaps we're not that familiar with, particularly or identities that we haven't taken the time ourselves to think about. For example, counsellors might say, "Oh, I've not really spoken about sex in the counselling room," and then we might say, "Oh, have you spoken?" Like, then you would be thinking about, talking to counsellors like, "But have you experienced talking about sex in your personal therapy or to your friends?" And similarly with something like sexuality and gender identity, how can we talk to our clients in depth about gender identity if we haven't taken the time to think about our own gender? Because the kinds of words and the things that will come up will be too fresh if we haven't explored this stuff within ourselves. So that's kind of my recommendation as a real starting ground.
Yeah, and I guess we don't want to be in a position where we're sat in front of a client and we're in two places. We're hearing the client story, but we're also asking questions about ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And so people, so like in the workshops that I do with counsellors, often people say to me, they get really caught up in kind of feeling like they've got to learn all the words. Like it's like a dictionary you've got to learn, and there's so many little words I've never heard of. And I try to kind of say, well, it's not about swallowing a dictionary. Things change and things move, and these words will mean different things even in just a few years' time. However, knowing some of the key words at this time and keeping abreast with it can be helpful, but it's not. Don't get caught up with feeling like you have to know everything. It's the general the understanding and the lens that you're looking at it through that's kind of more important, really.
Absolutely. It's not about the technical terms. It's about understanding where clients are in terms of the arc of their own experience and how the general community is developing their identity, I guess.
And clients really want, well, all clients really, they don't want things to be assumed about them. But like an example I could kind of give would be like, in the past, I was working with a counsellor, and they asked me, I was talking about my partner, and it was like early on, they were like, "Oh, what's his name?" And it was just that his, and so it's that pronoun, that use of pronoun, and I was just like, oh, like, because there's that kind of that assumption there, and so it's thinking about things like trying to use gender neutral language, being careful with the pronouns that you might be using about the people in the client's life, because if you've not heard a pronoun come up, then not kind of making that assumption. So there's stuff around pronouns, and it's not just about the client's pronouns, it's the pronouns about the people, because clients always often talk about the other people, because we're in relationships with other people when we're in a relationship with the world. Yeah.
And finally, Chloe, what do you hope that people will take away from this lecture? What when people have finished the lecture and they're having time to reflect, what do you hope they'll take away?
I really want them to take away confidence, to not feel like that they can't do this, confident to be able to make those small changes, like in their paperwork and in educating themselves, and not feeling just overwhelmed and be like, oh, I can't do this, and feeling like, if I get a trans client, I'm just going to have to refer them on. Like that real confidence that they can't do this, and that they know that there are ways that they can learn and they can build this up, and we can help all of our clients.
Yeah, so we can see all our clients and the whole for who they are.
Absolutely, yeah, because these things, gender and sexual diversity, is part of all of us, and it's things that in all different ways, even if we're not in a minority group, and these are things that may come up with all of our clients. So I think it's important to kind of be ready and aware, and not just think, sometimes people say, I live somewhere really rural, and this never happens, and I'll think, no, I don't think that's the case, because of course that's not true. Like gender and sexual diversity is everywhere, particularly when working online as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this incisive, I think, interview. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people take away a lot just from the podcast, but the lecture goes into it in far more depth. So, yeah. Chloe Foster, thank you so much for joining us.
Big thank you to Chloe Foster, and of course to you, Rory, for hosting that interview. And if you would like more information on working inclusively with LGBTQ community, you can listen to the entire lecture that Chloe did for us in the Counsellor CPD library. If you are a member, log in. That has been uploaded for you as a brand new lecture. If you are not a member of the Counsellor CPD library, then just go to counsellingtutor.com. All the information you will need is right there.
Yes, and I think an interesting and varied set of topics today in the podcast. We started with Counselling Foundations, pacing yourself in a session, the importance of working at the client's pace. In Focus on Self, we talked about the importance of journaling, how it can foster introspection, and an awareness of how far we've come through the journey of our existence. And finally, we caught up with Chloe Foster in Practice Matters, who talked about working inclusively with the LGBTQ plus community. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counselor CPD library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counselor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counselor CPD library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.